Hello, hello. Thank you all so much for your patience. I see folks are joining. Excellent. Excellent, excellent. So I want to thank everyone for your patience. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties. The links weren't working for two of our speakers, but we've got two of them on and we're waiting for one more to join us. So hopefully he'll get on while we're doing the welcomes and the introductions. So to start off, my name is Mary Furlong Minkoff. I'm on the board of the Orange County African American Historical Society. And I currently work as the Assistant Director and Curator of Archaeological Collections of the Archaeology Department at Montpelier. I've had the honor and the privilege of coordinating this year's Juneteenth celebrations in Orange. And we've been celebrating all month long. So every Thursday night, we're having one of these online virtual discussions, panel discussions. Our theme for this year's celebration has been celebrating stories of freedom. And in this theme, what we're trying to do is highlight that freedom didn't just happen on one day in June in Texas, but it was something that African Americans worked for hundreds of years all over the country, including here in Central Virginia. And we really want to highlight that through our conversation today. I'm really excited about our conversation today. It's going to be stories from our congregation, and it's an examination of the role of Virginia's Black churches in facilitating those kinds of freedoms. We have an amazing group of panelists here, and now they are all on board, so I'm even more excited about that. And I'm going to quick introduce them, and then we'll go into the program. How things are going to work today is I'm going to ask some questions of our panelists. They're going to answer, but as the audience, please be active in the chat. If you have any questions, feel free to add them to the chat at any moment. We're going to ask that you save any verbal questions to the end. We'll save about 10 minutes at the end, so you can raise your virtual hand, or you can continue to ask questions in the chat and we'll work them into the conversation. And we really want to hear from you all as part of this. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel. Our first panelist is Reverend Robert T. Anthony, Sr. He was born in Newark, New Jersey, to the late George Anthony and Charlotte Davis Anthony. He's married to Sarah Carey Anthony and the father of 3 children and 8 grandchildren. Reverend Anthony moved to Orange County, Virginia, and in his early boyhood, he lived in Barboursville and has lived there ever since he was a young boy. Educated in the public school systems of Culpeper and Orange counties, Reverend Anthony attended Piedmont Community College, Liberty University of Lynchburg Bible Institute, from which he graduated. He completed his evangelical training courses at the Maine Uno Baptist Bible Institute in Madison, Virginia, and received certificates in studies of the Bible while attending conferences in Virginia and North Carolina. Reverend Anthony's work in the church has been documented and he's held multiple offices. He's also been an active member in the community. He's been the president of the Barboursville Park Association, a member of the Orange County Park Board, the Orange County Historical Society, and he currently serves as the treasurer of the Orange County African American Historical Society. He's a member of the George Washington Carver High School Alumni Association, the Orange County branch of the NAACP, and is the chaplain of the Barboursville Volunteer Fire Department. Reverend Anthony is the former pastor of Mount Sinai Baptist Church of Dike, Virginia, and was called to pastor Blue Run Baptist Church of Barboursville, Virginia, in February 2018, where he currently presides. So we're really excited to have you here, Reverend Anthony. Our next panelist is Francis W. Scott Jr. He's the son of Francis W. Scott Sr. and Rachel Ann Page Scott, the grandson of Isaac Abraham Scott Jr. and Mary Frances Monroe Scott, the great-grandson of James Garland Monroe Sr. and Mary Frances Scott, and the great-great-grandson of Edward Ned Monroe and Melvina Windleton, and the great-great-great-grandson of Bristol Monroe and Morning Morris. He was born in UVA Hospital in Charlottesville, Virginia. Until 1960, the UVA hospital served its African-American patients in segregated wards located in the hospital's basement level. His hometown from birth until age 15 was Esmont in Albemarle County, Virginia, which is located approximately 27 miles from James Monroe's Highland. Mr. Scott currently resides in Roanoke, Virginia. The Commonwealth of Virginia employed him for 48 years, and he retired in the fall of 2021. Within the same year, state officials asked him to work part-time as a background investigator, and Mr. Scott is a member of Highlands Descendant Council. So we're really excited to have you with us today. And another panelist, for those of you who have been here before, you may recognize her from one of our previous panels, but we're so excited to welcome back Jennifer Saylor Stacy. She's the daughter of Ada Coleman Monroe Saylor and the late Lafayette Raymond Saylor, the granddaughter of the late Thomas Benton and Elnita Cobbs Monroe, the great granddaughter of the late Thomas Benton and Lucy Wilson Monroe Sr., great-great-granddaughter of the late Edward Ned and Harriet Captain Monroe. She grew up in Blenheim, Virginia, about 10 miles from James Monroe's Highland, and currently lives in Locust Grove, Virginia. Ms. Stacy is a senior budget analyst in the Office of the Secretary of the Budget and the Office of the Budget for the Assistant Secretary of Financial Resources at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. She's in a Partnership for Public Service Excellence in Government Fellows Program alumnus, and a member of the Highlands Descendants Council and William and Mary's President Monroe's Highland Commission. So we're so excited to welcome you back, Jennifer, welcome you, Francis, and welcome you tonight. So I wanted to start with a question to you all, and feel free for whoever wants to jump in first. But we've been talking about in this conversations throughout the month about how here in Virginia and across the country, African Americans did not just wait to be told they were free. They were active participants in securing their own freedom, the freedom of their family members, the freedom of their communities. We also know that freedom didn't happen just on one day, but was a process that happened over hundreds of years and continues today. So can any of you share a story about how churches in this area work towards the freedom of their congregants or other community members? And whoever would like to go first, just sort of wave your hand and get started. So, or I'll call him. Francis, I can see your mute's off, so I might make you go first.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, and we can see your face.
Unfortunately, I'm on my phone, so it's seems to be a technical difficulties tonight. So I'm having problems, and doing it on my phone is it's not the best thing in the world. However, I grew up in the Baptist church, and it was one thing the church was a solace for the members of the community, because back in my time growing up in the early 50s and 60s and 70s and the churches were well attended. You still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And, back from what I remember, even from my great grandfather's time, that were what they call stump preachers back in the day, because they had to, so the plantation owner would not allow anything from education to religion. They didn't want you to learn. So with that said, the slaves would find some place and secrete themselves either in the woods or someone's home, if they had it back in those days. And the preacher was called a stump preacher because he stood on a stump and preached to those congregants that showed up or were able to sneak out of their dwellings and come into the woods. But the difference is it was, it wasn't a social event. Everybody was glad to see one, because some people would come from near and far to come to church, depends on where you are, but the average community had a church which you attended. So I know Esmont has several, and New Hope Baptist Church and New Green Mountain. My mother grew up in New Green Mountain Baptist Church. My father grew up in New Hope, and New Hope started in the soon after the Civil War. So, I mean, that tells you that I think one of the oldest Black churches in the area is located in Charlottesville. But with that said, that congregation started with, they were incorporated with a white congregation at the beginning. And but all these other churches sprang up. As you can see, some of their inception dates are in the 1860s, 1870s, and 1880s. So it was a blessing, put it that way, to get together on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights. And I mean, we went back to church on Sunday evenings. So, I mean, everyone, that attended, I mean, that it was something for peace of mind, because things that were going on in Charlottesville when I was growing up, I mean, the signs that were there, I mean, keeping you out of certain places, restaurants, hotels, all establishments, eating places. I mean, anything that were signs saying, whites only and colored only. Your bathrooms, all of that was situated that way. So the schools were the same way. The schools officially didn't integrate into Virginia until 1965. My sister and I were one of the first 30 Black individuals that went to Albemarle County High School in 1965. There were grades 7 through 12. And, I didn't see anyone with my skin color until I got on the bus with my sister to leave school. Thank you for the moment.
No, thank you so much. I think it's really important what I heard you say is that the church has really served as a safe place, a place of solace, a place where people could gather and join, particularly when the outside world was not a safe place.
Right.
And I think that's a really important, safety is such an important connection to freedom, because if you're not safe, how can you be free? So Jennifer, I'll go to you next.
While Francis was talking, what came to mind is he was talking about stump preachers, but I think he neglected to tell a story that I think NPR may have recorded of his. Is this your grandfather?
Yeah, my great-grandfather.
Your great-grandfather was participating in one of the meetings with, I think, one of the Carrs.
Right.
That ended up maybe being governor at some point of Virginia at some point. Anyway, I may be getting that part wrong, but they were having a stump meeting and they could hear the dogs actually in the background coming, and they were about to get caught, so they had to run. And he talks about jumping a creek in order to escape them. And that's a story in our family that I certainly remember as being one of the first stories about congregating and breaking free to actually practice, religion and spirituality. And I often think about, we've always lived in a country where the Constitution says that there's religious freedom, and for some, but not all. And so I often think about that, but I'm a bit younger than Francis, so my memories of the church being a safe place, I don't have that same experience. I do have the experience of having politicians come to the church to talk about, to make their pitches, pastors that would actually talk about politicians that wanted the same freedoms or the same policies that would help Black people further themselves. So it's definitely known as a place to capture the attention of the Black community, and if you're a politician. And I guess my experiences with church they're, as an adult, they're a lot different. As a child, we were in church all day long, all day. I mean, there was a service always. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that that was like the social, that was like the social, it was not only the religious aspect, but it was a social aspect as well. And then as an adult, I used the church to reach out to the youth in the community and, to keep them engaged, to keep them, I did some civic training to make sure they knew how to vote, to make sure they knew, some basic rights that they had. And just, to be a filler for some things that I didn't believe they were getting in school. And to keep them out of trouble. And, and just the engagement alone. And, I can say that, I follow them on social media and many of them are doing really well. And I hope that as it's a result of some of the little things that we did to kind of keep them engaged and on the right track, and they vote and they talk about politics. And so that's a little piece that I can say I left a community that I used to live in. So
I think that's a really interesting point, the connection to civics, right? Because that's another way that we can connect to freedom or display our freedom is through when you have the right to vote, exercising and using it. And you may have seen me laugh when you've referenced the politicians. I myself was a child of a politician. And the first time I ever went to church, my father took me to a Black church to meet the congregants there. So
yeah,
it really happens.
it does. It does.
Reverend Anthony, the same question to you. What stories or what are the role of the church in Orange County in this area connecting to stories of freedom? Oh, Reverend Anthony, I think you're muted.
Okay.
Yes.
You hear me now? Okay, yeah, I saw. I don't know what happened. No, it's just what has already been stated, and I like how my brother started out with the older church and the slavery part, because it's very important for to note all of that. And so at Blue Run, the church that I pastor, I think it's unique, and that was one of the, not the only church, I'm sure, but that church started in 1769. And among its members, when it started, it had slaves in the midst. It had 2 slaves in the mix. So slaves had already been in the Blue Run Baptist Church. And when the Civil War came, of course, things changed. The historians that have taken the time to figure out what happened and how it split, we already kind of like know that because of the Civil War, there had to be some divisions in the church. So the church split, and of course they left that church, built another church later. And of course, the slaves were left, they were able to buy this church that I'm at now. Now the things that the history has been told and is well spoken, but in my time of speaking about the church, how that the church was the meeting place after even after slavery, but really during our time, updated up to the 50s, when we had a church that I could identify with. That when we met, we had no other place that was like the church. That was the venue. That was the place for to talk about any and everything that was happening from the past as well as to the present. And during my time before the schools were integrated as well, that was a place where you had no access to auditoriums or town halls or coliseums or any other, because of the Jim Crow laws and rules. So the church was very important and was instrumental in that. When you come to that church, there's no one going to be there that don't look like you. So you felt free to express whatever you had to express and do whatever you had to do and say what you had to say. because again, I lived in a time as well when segregation was going on, as well as when integration started. Of course, I didn't go to the Orange County High School, transferred from the black school at Carver and Culpeper until 1977. I'm sorry, 1967. I'm sorry. And so I know that the things that went on during those years, the church was important because that was the place where we organized. The only thing I can remember that many haven't said much about in our area, there weren't many churches who had 4 Sunday or 5 Sunday services. We had circuit preachers during my time in the 50s and into the 60s. And so we still met though. And so we had that still was a meeting place, not just for the Sunday service, but for other things as well. So the church was instrumental in political things as well as other engagements that went on. And of course, we know what went on, especially with Jim Crow. It's already been spoken of about, where we're supposed to drink our water from. And it comes out of the same well, but but he was told we can drink out of this one, couldn't use that. So I'm just counting that the church was really the most important, one of the most important places that we had for any venue to discuss and to prepare or get a plan or pass the plan around, or just keep everybody informed on just what's going on.
Wonderful, thank you. So I've heard you.
So that was my piece of. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was gonna say, I've heard you all talk about the church as an important place for gathering, social, religious practice, political action. But one of the things we also know is that the church was a really important place for the keeping of community history. So can you talk a little bit about the role of the church as a place of kind of keeping those community histories, those stories, and those records? And whoever wants to jump in can go.
Well, I'll say this is that, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay. Even back in my time growing up, see, the older folks, you were a child and you were treated as a child. So when they were having a conversation, okay, you were not allowed unless you were standing around a corner someplace listening. Okay, but so my grandparents, aunts, uncles, and great aunts and uncles, you just didn't chime in on a conversation. But then, they would talk to you about some things, but ordinarily, when it came to adult issues, as they would call it, they hardly would tell you things, but you had to learn on your own. And the way I've learned is from just talking to some of the older folks as I grew up that would talk to you then. Because back then, if things happened, then the children weren't really a part of it. There was child things, but the adult part of it, you were left completely out of it. So, I mean, the history of the church, you learned, after you became an adult, really, because, and as the Reverend had said, that were, during his time, there were circuit preachers, but even the churches that I attended, I mean, there were 4 and 5 Sundays. Okay, you went to that individual church, the members did. And then when it came to homecoming, okay, everybody's was on a different Sunday. So you had folks that came back from New York, New Jersey, that would tell their stories, how they left the area, went up north because they went up north for jobs. Okay, they couldn't get a good job here in Virginia. So New York, New Jersey, Delaware, all up north, that's where they went to work. But, factually, if your mom and them sat around and told stories that, they told, things, but we weren't allowed to be in the same room.
Yeah, Reverend Anthony or Jennifer, I would love for one of you all to pick up on, maybe talk a little bit about the importance of homecoming too, because as someone who didn't grow up going to church, I didn't learn about homecoming outside of a high school football game until I moved to Virginia. So kind of, if you either
It's
share
really-
about sort of the importance of homecoming would be
It's
really
really,
interesting.
it's really special to me. I mean, I'm probably the youngest of the three. And I, my mother actually has to really fight hard to keep that tradition the way that it was, forever, which is, at Middle Oak, families still prepare meals. And, there's a morning service. And it's a time when your family that moved up north and everybody comes back to church for that particular Sunday. And then there's a revival that used to happen the entire week. Now that's been modified a bit over time, but we still maintain the tradition of families cooking meals for their families to come and friends to come and enjoy, and then an evening service. And my mom fights really hard to keep that tradition, because I think a lot of churches move to, there'd be one menu and, and people would come, and it wouldn't be so much about people coming back home to, to fellowship and to really express love. But what it did is it brought a lot of stories. It brought the family members that I didn't know, I'd never met. And, I think for me, every year it seemed to be a new family member that I was meeting, but it just kept the strength and the connection going. That was just something to look forward to. And I remember my grandmother, she loved to cook for the community, and just, and we had to retire her when she got too old, and my mom took over most of the cooking, but my grandmother insisted on doing desserts. So she used to sit at a table and serve all of her family members that came back and friends the desserts that she'd taken so much care to prepare for them. And I think that in terms of, just maintaining the history, I think they were the times when they were sharing the stories. They were getting you familiar with who your family was. Sometimes we come back after church and they would talk about, their experiences, the love. It was a time to share history, but it was a time to share a lot of love as well, through cooking and nurturing, and also through the service that was usually, the best preachers, for the week. And it was just very stirring. And that's how I got baptized during homecoming week, during revival. I joined church that week, was baptized later by the pastor that, actually for me, it was Roger J. Ford. So I do remember that. But that's just the memory, but they are the stories and the histories passed on, because I share those stories with my nephews and nieces, because they have no idea how grand it used to be. And it still is at Middle Oak, but I think the pandemic just kind of, people are gradually feeling safe enough to come out again. So we're hopeful that this year will be as grand as past years.
Amazing, thank you. Reverend
Can I
Anthony.
add something to what Jennifer?
Oh, yes, go right ahead.
And
Jennifer.
yes,
Okay,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
and she was talking about her grandmother, and see, even before Jennifer was born, because see, all of my family came from Middle Oak Baptist Church, especially the Monroe side. And, homecoming, as I said before, was one of those things where, you visited with everybody from when they came from out of town. But see, and her grandmother was my cousin. So we were there at her house after church there at Middle Oak after homecoming, because we went there, and she cooked. And Jennifer's mom was there, her mother and all. So we were all there at her house on late Sunday afternoon after church. In speaking of talking, the kitchen was the place where you gathered to have a conversation. We served dinner, but the kitchen was where, a lot of times where everybody gathered, even if you had visitors, they would stand in the kitchen and talk. Thanks.
Thank you. Reverend Anthony, can
Okay,
you talk a little bit
okay.
about homecoming?
Also to add, yeah, to add to that, again, I agree with all that's been said concerning the homecoming. It was more than just a homecoming for the churches. Really, was families coming home to be with family and to attend church, and everyone looked forward to homecoming. As they said, the families were preparing meals, and it was a time that we didn't have kitchens, we didn't have dining halls, but every year. I remember in the 50s, especially, and the early 60s, we had no dining hall. But the tradition was everyone still came home. The family still bought all kind of dishes, and they served them on tables they bought, or they had some tables already on the church grounds. And so there was so many different families that put their foods and stuff together. And so you went from one table to the next enjoying the food, but also in the church, you enjoyed the all-day service. You was going to have the morning, and as I said, they were going to have an afternoon speaker. And most of the time, the afternoon speaker was going to be the one that was going to be carrying on the revival throughout the week. Morning service, the afternoon service after they took the break for dinner, and then they would come back for that afternoon. And so, and that would lead up to the 5 next day, Monday through Friday revival that I always remember. They weren't from local, they were they came from other places, other states, and now we use all of the preachers, no matter where they're from, local or wherever. And I'm just remembering that's how that wasn't how it used to be, but nevertheless, the preachers that's together today in our local churches, somewhere along the line, they found out that these local preachers had just as much firepower as those preachers from out of town. That folk would come from miles around to see and to hear. And as far as Middle Oak, both of those young folk that just talked, I preached at that church before I became a pastor. I preached at the churches down there as well, but maybe not in Brother Scott's time, because he might have come home sometime, but nevertheless, that's how we saw and met each other. We went to each other's revivals, and they were all similar. It was all folk coming home. And then, of course, we'd met some until we remembered that. And so it was a good time. It was a big time. And as far as also, it used to be seemingly like the folk in the community looked like they would wait till homecoming for them to come up to be baptized. I thought that when I was coming up, that you couldn't get baptized until your homecoming come up. I don't know. But nevertheless, that's not the way it is now. I just baptized about 3 weeks ago. Our homecoming is not until August. But yeah, so all of that was in the mix. And like I said, we as young folk, we live and we learn, we listen, and there was sometimes we couldn't have our mouths running. We had to listen on the side or go outside. And so I think the overall view, I think we all probably had the same thing going on, some of the same things going on in our churches. So it's similar. The similarities are there for homecoming and revival services.
So one of the things that I'm hearing you all say is how important these events are for people coming back and building those family connections, but intergenerational as well. But also, as Reverend Anthony said, going to other people's revivals and building a community sort of across the region and across the area. And so it seems that, the church serves as this nexus connecting people across space, but also across generations. So what would you want the next generation, the generations coming up behind you, what do you want them to know about the role of the church in the community or in history? or the role of the churches? What do you want that next generation to know or to do? And Reverend Anthony, I'm going to go to you first.
Okay, what I would love for them to know, and I got some that's, of course, in my church that are young. I got grandkids in my church, and I would like for their listening ears to be on and the eyes to see how we're doing what we're doing now, but to also to school them on how things always weren't like they are now. We always didn't have all of the things we have in the building, the nuances, when I was going to church back in the day, sure, we had electricity, but they still had those lamps and things still hanging around in the church that from the past. So I want them to remember the past to see what we went through, but we got to tell it to them. And we got to let them know that it wasn't as easy as it is now. And also to let them know that for them to carry on, they can't forget the past, but they have a great responsibility because of the way things are now, because of all of the modern technology that they have now. Don't use it just for social media and all of those things, but you can use it for the Spirit of the Lord, for to use it in your church, not just for the church, but you're going to use it in your little businesses that we hoping that they form. And many of them have gone to college that many didn't get that opportunity when we were coming up. Of course, I was able to go and my sister was able to go, and it was open by this time. But now things are a little faster moving. And I would love for them to know that the next generation have to remember and have to look around. And I always encourage them to become part of the church and being doers of the things they see. We already know what James said about not just hearing the word, but being a doer of it also. So not to try to lay the Bible on them so hard, but just in real life, that they can learn a lot from the church, because there's some political leaders that's in the church, and sometimes you got to show your good leadership, and everybody's not going to be a preacher, everybody's not going to be a deacon, etc. But we want them to use their talents in the church, as some did years ago, but they didn't realize. They think that so many young folk are turned off from the church because they really haven't been taught or haven't been encouraged. And some are turned off because there's been a turning away from the church. And the virus certainly didn't help at all, because that made it even less. And even right now, it's hard to get some to get back on board. I think the Lord is telling us, though, that maybe the way we had been doing is not really suitable. It's not really what it needs to be. There's things that they can do that can encourage and help others. And we tell the story of how we did, like you say, how we ventured to other churches and supported one another. Then they can do the same thing as well. And especially once you're out in this world that we live in, going to school, you're going to have some opportunities for starting your families and your businesses, etc. And you need one another. So I think the church needs to talk about unity and about the roles of the past being exposed and shown, but also let them know that there's still a lot to explore that the church can be a part of. But they have to attend the church and not just sit on the sideline. They have to encourage others. And I always tell my kids, and I'm gonna stop talking after this, but I always tell my kids and my grandkids, even when they're coming up, don't be ashamed to pray in public, because somewhere along the line, I've been dealing with the schools and doing some things in the schools with breakfast buddies and all of that kind of stuff. And I see no one praying for their food. And so I'll be encouraging mine to do it. So those are little things that we need to do a small way, but we need to also encourage them, because they're going to be the next generation of leaders.
Absolutely. Thank you. Francis,
The church can help.
What do you want the next generation to know or think about?
Well, remember that the Black church came from invisibility to where it is now. I mean, back, 200 years ago, 100 years ago, I mean, as I said, that there was a stump preacher out there and they were hiding in the woods or any place, just to worship the Lord. So nowadays that you've got all the modern conveniences, as the Reverend has said, it's all you have to do is attend, because there's something that you can pick up in church. I mean, even in fact, a job, if it pushes, because there is someone there that has a connection with the community that and even nationwide, because politicians come and and I laugh at this because they usually come at the time when they want to get reelected, and then you don't see them anymore. But there is a connection with the church. I mean,
Amen.
even the connection
Amen.
with religion. The difference is it is always, it's that you train up a child in the way it should go, and it will never, hopefully will never depart from it as it grows older. So, and religion, and as Reverend said, COVID didn't help anything. I mean, it kind of took folks out of the church for a while. We did ours electronically and broadcast. We were outside for almost 2 years with our services. But, as I said, it has come from invisibility to now what you have now. If you had to go through what people did back in the day, with even in Alabama with churches being bombed, and you could, you were afraid in some ways, because I mean, the Ku Klux Klan were gonna, was an instrumental part. So of that, but but you just can't forget it, because there is a connection there in the church for you somewhere.
Thank you. Jennifer, what do you want the next generation to know?
So, I was thinking in a different direction, because I actually, it's what I want the older generation to know, is that the church was there and that's all we had for us. And now I feel like we are failing the youth, because we act as though the church is there and you should come. And I think outreach is important. And I don't think our churches do enough outreach and to bring in the youth. And I think that when you do the outreach, it doesn't start with us getting them to come to church on Sunday. It's about building trust, because I think we fail them in some ways. And so I know with my nephews and my nieces, for me, I couldn't be at home on a Sunday and think that I was going to just lounge around on a Sunday. I had to be in church. And I don't know that my generation raising children actually had the same standards and the same requirements in the household, which is one of the reasons why I think the connection between the youth today has been broken, and that is for us to reestablish. It's sad to say this, but it's like churches aren't competitive. They're not competing to get the attention of the youth. And I think it's important, because personally, this is me talking. I feel that spiritual foundation is what keeps them from being lost. And I feel like many of them are spiritually lost and struggling in ways that I don't think we're even addressing, not at the church, not in our communities, not in our community services board. I think that I look at the person as a whole. And if you take care of the physical, if you take care of the emotional, and you don't take care of the spiritual, there's something missing. So I do think that, there has to be an effort. And while I agree with everything that Francis and Reverend Anthony said, I do believe that that we have work to do as the generation, before them, to reconnect them with the important things in life that are going to end up saving them when their souls are sad and when they're experiencing sorrow. I think that, if I didn't have the spiritual foundation that my mother, my grandmother and my dad and grandfather made sure I got, I would not have been able to endure some of the things that I have experienced in my life, made some of the choices that I've made in my life, but it was the spiritual foundation that gave it to me. And I think that our churches need to do a better job of reaching out to reconnect the youth so that they have those same things that we had. So, I know I sound like I'm in a pulpit, but I'll stop now.
No, I think it's wonderful. And I think, it's so much of what you all said talks about really learning from the past. So learning from what has happened in the past, but not necessarily doing everything that you've done the same way you've always done it. And connecting with the next generation in new ways, in ways they understand, and being meaningful. But those values and that foundation of making sure that gets transmitted. And I think that's really important. I'd like to invite the audience to either raise their virtual hands or ask some questions in the chat. And we actually have a question in the chat right now. Mike asks about why do you all think that the Baptist Church in particular seems to have been such an important component of African-American communities and and has provided community for African-American families. So what do you think it is about the Baptist Church?
Well, it's the institution, it's an organization. And so, I mean, if we struggle now to have our history taught in schools, back then they had to be the keepers of the history and responsible for passing it down. And to sit here and say that we're struggling now to get our history told is honestly sad. But think about hundreds of years ago when, it definitely was not being taught. It definitely was not being recorded. That the church was an organization, and without it, a lot of people would know. The graveyards tell the story, the obituaries tell the story, the oral history that's passed down during some of the homecomings. I think that it had to be the haven because it was the hub.
So Francis or Reverend
This is
Anthony?
Pastor Anthony. I don't know if necessarily too, as the question is put about whether it be the Baptist Church. I think one of the things about the Baptist Church is there, for some reason, it's seeming like, and I'm just putting this away because not just because I'm a Baptist preacher, but it seemed like there were more Baptist churches than any other denomination. And it's not like they are the only one that's, worshiping our Father who art in heaven. But I think the thing about it is emphasis is put on the Baptist church, but many have left the Baptist church and went to other churches and started other formats and etc. But I believe truly that the church that believes in God and pushes Jesus Christ, stand on the promises that he has made, regardless what denomination it is, as long as it is a Bible believing church, not one that believe in other things. Yes, we do need to set a role. We need to set the profile or whatever to get things lined up, because we are one of the oldest that was allowed to be around, I reckon, to have their own churches where it's viable and you see them everywhere. You see other churches as well now, but the Baptist churches were a main focus. They had the main, that was one of the lights that shined throughout the South, the North and the South. And I just think that it's important too, that the outreach that you were speaking about was, I think it's very important for the outreach, that our role should, I think, get a little more, we should do a little more toward it. And I think we're still looking for answers on what is the best way to get that connection going for all of the churches, for enlightenment and for to encourage and get empowerment to our next generation and our young folk, and how we have done what we have done in the past, and keep it moving, to the next level. Because to get folk back into the point where we come from, it's a whole different. We're not going to have the neighborhoods and the communities like we used to have. We didn't have all of the things that these young kids got access to today. And there's more, the more things that they have, and that we see, such as internet and etc., then that's more exposure to them, that they're even having more issues than we had. We didn't see all of that. So it's still somewhere along the line that we need to come to a consensus, come together as believers in Christ, and have some greater and better empowerment, outreach, connections.
I was listening.
I just
to your
see
first
that
part.
we got to be, our role should be more.
I was listening to the first
Oh,
part
I'm
of
sorry. Go
your
ahead.
answer.
I'm sorry.
No, I was listening to the first part of your answer when you started talking specifically about why the Baptist Church. I'm not going to put this in the context of, historically. Historically, I think when I think about the Baptist Church, I think about expression, and I think about the freedom to express emotions while in church. I mean, I've gone to many different denominations, and I can tell you that we answer the preacher. I watched my grandmother get happy in church, and when I don't know if other people know what that means, but I certainly know what that means. And there's just it's a freedom to express just the pain, the sorrow, whatever emotion, the happiness, the joy, whatever it is that is going on. The Baptist Church provides the ability for people to be expressive and openly weep, openly, testify about their, just the pain that they've experienced in life. And when my grandmother got happy in church, because I used to sit beside her and I didn't know when it was coming. And there were times that I had to duck out of the way because she really expressed whatever was inside, it came out. It was just an opportunity for you to be as expressive as possible. And I've visited other denominations, and there are other denominations that are like that I think Pentecostal, I used to see it, but I've visited Catholic churches, Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, I've visited Methodist. It's just the ability for the Baptist Church to just accept that expression. And I think that's a big part of it.
I think that's really important when you think about that expression being
I
regulated.
agree. Amen.
Or unallowed in public spaces and so many other components of your life, whether it's through slavery, through segregation. You're not allowed to have open acts of joy or sorrow or anger. I do also think that there's definitely regional differences. So the Baptist Church is very strong here in Central Virginia. You can go up into Maryland, and AME Church is very strong there, and AME Zion. Go down to the Gulf Coast, and you have lots of Catholic churches and different congregations. So I think there's a regional history that also plays into that. But I think your observation about that personal expression as being so important, particularly within the context of not being allowed to have that, I think is a really important observation. We had another question from the chat that I just wanted to throw out to whoever would like to answer it. John asks to please comment on the role of women in sustaining African-American churches. So we've talked a lot about Jennifer's grandmother, which makes me wish I could have met her.
No,
But
women ended up being the backbone of the church. And I will say that, and then I'll let the men talk. But I know in many, many churches, if women were not going, the church would be empty in a lot of cases. So I'll put that out there. So.
Well, in so many ways, that's true. But even back during my time, the men folk actually attended because there were numerous deacons, and the trustees were men because you had to have the church, clean. They took care of the building, interior and exterior. But even now, there are a lot more women even in my current church than there are men. But because I remember one of the first women ministers that I saw was cousin Rebecca Jordan, who was a minister right there in Esmond. And she was one, and even though being a minority, she was a minority as far as a minister was concerned. But the role of the women, even when it came to homecoming, or services that, to prepare, food, everything else, because I can even remember going to certain churches that, you could sit there cold, because there was no heat, or you had a stove that was sitting a wood stove that was sitting on one side because of the church that kept it warm. But women were crucial. Because I know my mom was, because my mom played piano. There were several other women that played piano, and there were some of the men, but there were more women that played the piano than the men. So, but anyway.
Well, I was a past trustee of the church that I attended for a couple decades, and honestly, it evolved it evolved because of need. Just to take on the roles that were traditionally for men. Women had to step in when there was just an absence or a
lack of
need. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we're a little past 8, and I don't want to keep people too much longer, but I want to invite you all to leave the audience with a final thought. What do you want them to take away from this evening's conversation? Something that you want them to think about, hold on to, and remember. So, Reverend Anthony, why don't you go first?
Okay. First, I want to address real short the part about the women of the church and in the church. They do make up. If it weren't for the women in the church, we probably would not have a church as far as as people being there. And it's very important that I know that when we look at the history of the church, men have been the dominant force in the source. When you look at the word, even Jesus, all his disciples were men. And when you just look at the Old Testament and even come, as they say, a long way. And there's some scriptures that we don't have time to go into that cause some issues that see that. Sister Jordan was one, but her mama was a preacher too, brother. Don't forget that. Her mama was a preacher before she. And there's some others. But I'm not going to try to get the church, but there's some scripture that and it's more than one, and some folk get them confused. Women, we have women pastors that didn't be none, not many when we were coming up. Women are trustees. Many of deaconess in the church, many other positions they hold. So I'll let that go because I know you said we're getting late. But I do want the audience to take away from our discussion and tonight is that it's that as far as the Black church and the roles that it has played in the past and the present and looking to the future, is that we need to get back to the connection that we had when we were young and when we were coming up. We needed that. It has caused us to know each other better and know each other more and know each other from far distances. And that's why when I was, again, I can talk about all of those different places that I visited when we were going to the various homecomings and revivals And that was the time we couldn't meet each other on Sundays, but we would certainly make a way to meet each other on homecoming that can keep us going, but also we can learn from one another and connect with one another. We have, and so that's what I want to pass on, that don't lose the connection. Matter of fact, add to it. And we got the modern technology, continue to add to it and not take away. And so you're gonna need the young folk for to keep it going. They know much more than, I'll just say, me. So I just want them to take away from this, that the Black church had connections to get where it is today, and it need those connections to keep going.
Excellent. Thank you, Reverend Anthony. And I think your connection broke a little at the end there. But Francis, what would you like our audience to take away with, a thought or ending thought?
Well, the Black church is history. It's, it's been there since the Civil War, and it was a way of connecting with the community. So the average minister that, was connected with that church, and you can go back to many of that had numerous ministers over the decades, but they were a part of the community that, so if someone had a problem at night or someone died, the first person they called was that minister. And so it was an integral part of the community, which you could go to and confide with that minister. That he would end up keeping your secrets, or he would be a mediator between whatever you needed, if he were needed.
Thank you. Jennifer, what's a final thought that you want folks to take away tonight?
That the church is a huge part of who we are. At least, growing up and, certainly in Central Virginia, it was just such a huge part of who we are, who we were, and, just the importance of it, that the spiritual foundation, the place where you can come and lay your burdens down and, celebrate. It was just, it's not only about religion, it's about community, it's about networking, it's about, just the freedom to be, and to express. And that is, I have those great memories of when church was huge and when it was everything. And I would love it if my nephews, nieces, and future generations could know that once again, the way that it was. But I do think that there's work that we have to do in order to make it great again. And I've never been afraid to get my hands dirty. And I think that other people need to do the same thing. And if we do more of it, we could, we could, that's what made us strong. I think that's, if there had not been church during the civil rights movement, I don't know how it would have moved. I don't. So I'm very thankful for those that went before me and made it happen, and for giving me the foundation that I have, and for everything the church has been for me, my family. I'm very grateful.
Well, I just want to thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts, your stories, the history, the information, and your visions for the future with us tonight. I think it's been a really powerful and really important conversation. For our audience members, I put a link in the chat to the OCAHS website, where all of our past programs, there's videos, and the recordings of those are all up on that website. And this conversation will also go up on there later this week. I also want to say we have one program left in our month-long celebration. We've done it in person, we've done it in line, and we have one program left next Thursday at 7 p.m., just like this, where we're going to be talking with all different types of artists about expressions of freedoms in the arts. So in poetry, in performing arts, in the visual arts. And I think it's going to be a really powerful conversation about the power of art to share ideas about freedom and that freedom of expression. And Jennifer, what you talked about with the expression in the church, it just, here's another way when you are so limited that we can talk about those things. The other sort of final plug I'll make this evening is if you are not currently a member of the Orange County African American Historical Society, please join. You can go to our website and join. It is $15 a year, so it is well within most of our budget to join. And that will get you on our list to find out about more programs like this, both in person and online, and to really get involved in exploring the history here in Central Virginia, particularly in Orange County. And I just want to give a special thank you to Jennifer, to Francis, but also I see Sarah's on here, Sarah Bon Harper. This connection between Orange County, the Orange County African American Historical Society and the Highland Descendants Council, I really hope we can do more stuff together. So I really enjoyed having you all be a part of these conversations this month. And hope that this is a great bond across Central Virginia that will move forward together. So thank you so much.
And thank you for inviting us. We really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate as well. So we look forward to it in the future.
Well, great. Well, it's good. Oh,
Thank you.
thank you. I think Reverend Anthony, were you trying to talk? You're on mute. You're still on mute.
So what now?
Oh, Reverend Anthony, there you go.
What was you saying? I didn't hear you.
Oh, I was just saying thank you. You look like you were talking, but you were on mute. So
Oh, no, I was saying some amens. That's what I was doing.
perfect. Well, on that
All
note,
right.
with some thank yous and some
Mine done went mute. I reckon we go.